Good afternoon. Welcome to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. My name is Buffy. I'm an almost 18-year criminal defense attorney. Today we're talking about legal innocence versus emotional guilt. Why acquittal is never the end. Why do some people remain guilty in the public mind, even after they're acquitted? Freedom doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like exile. The legal line. The law recognizes a difference between legal innocence and factual innocence. Courts stop when the legal process ends. Society rarely does, because I'm sure that if you are found not guilty, there are people who are going to remember that you were on trial. That would be difficult, especially because you went through the court proceeding and there was a certain result. But oftentimes people feel like the legal system can be a system that is not fair, that is biased, that has technicalities that are waiting around every corner, that there are judges who can be bought and sold. Yes, there may be situations like that, but that is not the norm. And ultimately, the system works to try to be as fair as they possibly can. But ultimately, it is a human institution. Human institutions are rarely, if ever, perfect. I know we've talked a lot about like the habeas motions and things like that, requiring the constitutional issue to be present, and how it's a very narrow gate. Very few get in, very few succeed. The emotional need for blame. And I think that that is ultimately the thing, that somebody was harmed in some way. Somebody has to be held accountable. And ultimately, accountability is a good thing. When someone harms someone else in one way or another, should they be held accountable? Yes, they should be. But the system is not foolproof, right? It is not perfect. It's not meant to be perfect, because people are going to make mistakes, unfortunately. And unfortunately, a lot of times the victim who endured whatever happened to them, whether they were murdered, whether they were, sexually assaulted, whatever it is that happened to them, they will bear that and feel like they didn't get the justice that they deserved, right? And that is a very real feeling, especially for victims and their families who know what that person has endured, and ultimately courts are supposed to try to almost make a person whole. But depending on what happened to that individual, whether they lost somebody in their lives or whether it was their own pain that they're dealing with and suffering and the things that they've endured, the court can't necessarily make you whole. I mean, that's the goal, but ultimately it's going to fall short, unfortunately, and people are not going to feel like they've been made whole. They're going to go back to what they've endured, which makes sense. I mean, if they've endured an injury that has had a substantial impact on their lives, of course they're going to feel like that, right? Wouldn't anybody normally say, hey, look, like I was fine and then this happened to me out of nowhere? I've been a victim of a couple of car accidents. I'm not trying to compare those to that, but I'm just saying there's the moment where you're like, literally, like this person slammed into me and like this all happened and I had all this pain and I'm not feeling whole, right? How many of you have been through that scenario, right? Maybe that's a non like emotional topic, or maybe it is an emotional topic depending on what you endured, right? And so we all just want to be back into the place that we were before someone didn't uphold the duty that they had, right? The rules of the road, paying attention, not texting, things like that. So humans struggle with uncertainty. And I think that that's just a human emotion. That's what happens. We want clean endings. We want happily ever after, right? Didn't we all grow up on fairy tales? And they lived happily ever after, right? Wouldn't that be great if we all lived happily ever after? If everyone in the world was happy and holding hands and singing Kumbaya, would we all be happy? I'd like to think we could be. Clear villains, right? Good versus evil. Good versus bad. Moral resolution. In the end, they get it right. The hero, he always saves the day, and he's always a moral, upstanding gentleman, right? Isn't that what we'd like to think? So when a verdict doesn't give emotional closure, people keep punishing socially, publicly, and indefinitely. And there's no way that you are going to get someone who believes that Bob Smith is guilty, that you're going to get them to say that he's not guilty. Because every time they see Bob Smith, or every time they see him on TV, or mention his name, or maybe even run into him, they say, why aren't you in prison? Right? You should be in prison for XYZ. So the cost. Endless punishment doesn't serve justice. It serves discomfort. And when we refuse to let it go, we replace law with narrative and certainty with cruelty. I think a lot of people would do best just to kind of think about treating people like the golden rule, treating people the way you want to be treated. I mean, you may have that opinion that Bob Smith is guilty, okay? But isn't it a little strange that you're like following Bob Smith around and telling him how guilty he is? I mean, imagine if somebody was doing that to you. You were acquitted of a crime, right? And then here you have this person continuing to harass you for something that has already been settled in a court of law, which is the mechanism that we have. I don't know. So closing question. If the law says it's over, but society won't let it go, who is justice really serving? Right? What a good question. Who is justice really serving? Feel free to weigh in on the comments. Because honestly, I mean, is it an illusion of justice? Are we thinking that everyone who goes to trial is going to be immediately found guilty? Likely not. Maybe Bob Smith had a alibi. We talked about alibis too. Maybe Bob Smith was somewhere else. Who knows, right? Maybe Bob Smith had a defense of some kind, right? We cannot be vigilantes, right? That's what our justice system is for, to provide fair, impartial trials that are sanctioned by law and the Constitution and people's rights. So thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope you'll come back and see us at Grace and Gavel again, where truth meets compassion. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me for you all tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.